December 1944. The Rhine winds cut through the shattered ruins of Western Germany. Smoke rises in ragged columns from bombed-out towns, mingling with the cold mist of winter morning. The crunch of frozen mud under boots is broken by a low, ominous rumble. Panzer engines echo through the hollow streets. A German Panther advances, its turrets swinging with cautious precision. The crew inside is tense, eyes scanning the horizon. They have faced Shermans before. They have faced artillery barrages, airstrikes, ambushes. But this is different. Across the field, a new American tank emerges through the fog. Larger, heavier, bristling with the long 90mm gun. The Pershing. It pauses, engine growling, and then unleashes a thunderous shot. The shell tears through the air, striking the Panther's armor. Inside, the crew is stunned. Their machine, built to dominate, shudders but does not crumble. Another shot, another strike, yet the Pershing keeps advancing. Relentless. Shock. Fear. Awe. Whispers ripple through the German lines. It can take anything we throw at it and still survive. In that instant, the balance begins to shift. The war they thought they knew is changing under their feet. The battlefield is alive with tension. Every armored vehicle, every soldier, feels the weight of this new weapon. The Pershing is not just a tank. It is a herald of the Allies' growing dominance. The stage is set, and the German crews are about to discover the impossible. By late 1944, the war in Europe had reached a critical juncture. After the D-Day landings on June 6, 1944, Allied forces poured into Normandy, breaking the German Atlantic Wall and pushing eastward through France. The German Wehrmacht, once seemingly invincible in its blitzkrieg campaigns, was being steadily pushed back. Cities lay in rubble. Supply lines were stretched thin. Morale among German troops wavered as the Allies' overwhelming industrial and logistical power began to take its toll. The Allies faced their own challenges. The dense hedgerows of Normandy had slowed the advance. German Tiger and Panther tanks still posed lethal threats. American and British forces had learned through costly encounters that the Sherman, though reliable and plentiful, was often outmatched in direct tank-to-tank combat. Shermans could be penetrated by the German 75mm and 88mm guns with devastating efficiency. Crews had to rely on maneuver, coordination, and air support to survive. Recognizing the need for a more powerful armored solution, the United States began deploying the M26 Pershing in late 1944. Its development had been a slow process, delayed by bureaucratic disputes, production priorities, and skepticism from high command, who believed that Shermans, with tactical adjustments, were sufficient. But by the winter of 1944, the realities of facing Panther and Tiger tanks necessitated a shift. The Pershing was a new generation of American tank, heavier, better armored, and armed with a 90mm gun capable of penetrating the thick frontal armor of German heavy tanks. The battlefield environment was changing rapidly. The Ardennes forest in Belgium had become a focal point as German forces launched their last major offensive, the Battle of the Bulge, in December 1944. American units, many exhausted from months of continuous combat, faced freezing temperatures, limited supplies, and unexpected counterattacks. The terrain was a mix of dense forests, icy rivers, and crumbled villages, perfect for ambushes, but perilous for advancing armor. It was here, in the chaos of winter combat, that the Pershing would first prove its mettle. American armored units were now equipped not only with Shermans, but with the promise of the Pershing, a tank designed to match or surpass the firepower and protection of Germany's finest. For German crews, Encountering this new tank would be a shock. They had trained to respect the Sherman's speed and reliability, but few had prepared for a vehicle capable of taking multiple hits without destruction, capable of outmatching their Panther or Tiger head-on. The stage was set. Exhausted German tank crews facing an enemy armed with superior armor and firepower, in freezing conditions, across terrain that amplified every mistake. And yet, amidst this tension, the Allies were still refining tactics, learning to integrate the Pershing effectively with infantry, artillery, and air support. The first encounters would test not just the machine, but the strategies of both sides. The battlefield was ready. The Pershing was on the move, and the Germans were unaware of the shock soon to unfold. By early 1945, the M26 Pershing had begun to arrive in European theaters, albeit in limited numbers. American forces were transitioning from the attritional strategies of Normandy and the Rhineland to more decisive armored thrusts into the heart of Germany. The tank, weighing nearly 41 tons, carried a 90mm M3 gun, significantly more powerful than the 75mm guns mounted on most Shermans. It could penetrate the frontal armor of a Panther at typical combat ranges and engage Tigers with a realistic chance of success. For American commanders, this represented a strategic shift, a move toward parity and, in some cases, superiority in direct armored engagements. German forces, by contrast, were in decline. The Wehrmacht had suffered massive losses in men and material, and new recruits often lacked the training and experience of their veterans. Panther and Tiger tanks were still formidable, but logistical. Shortages, fuel, ammunition, and replacement parts hampered their effectiveness. Additionally, the psychological toll of facing an enemy with superior air cover and growing technological advantage weighed heavily on crews. Radio intercepts, reconnaissance reports, and post-combat reports show repeated instances of German units underestimating American armor, only to be caught off guard by the Pershing's firepower and resilience. The first operational deployment of Pershings occurred during the Allied push across the Rhine. The tank was paired with mechanized infantry, engineers, and artillery in combined arms operations designed to minimize vulnerabilities. Unlike the WWII Sherman, which relied on mobility and numbers, the Pershing could engage in direct confrontations with German heavy armor. This tactical flexibility was crucial in late-war Europe, where urban combat, river crossings, and defensive strongpoints demanded both firepower and protection. Training for American crews was rigorous. Crews learned to engage German armor, optimal ranges, understand armor angles, and coordinate with supporting elements. Field reports from January 1945 highlight the contrast with previous Sherman operations. Pershings survived hits that would have destroyed a medium tank, returning fire with devastating effect. The psychological impact on German soldiers encountering these tanks in combat cannot be overstated. Accounts from captured German officers note disbelief at the tank's endurance, often describing them as invincible or iron monsters, capable of turning the tide of an engagement almost single-handedly. The combination of technological innovation and battlefield necessity meant that Pershings were not merely another tank. They represented a statement of American industrial and tactical capability. The German crews who encountered them were suddenly forced to confront a harsh reality. The balance of armored warfare had shifted. They could no longer rely solely on superior training or tactical cunning. They were now facing a weapon that demanded respect, precision, and, often, retreat. By the time American forces began pushing deeper into Germany in early 1945, Pershings had already begun leaving a mark on both the battlefield and enemy morale. The stage was set for the encounters that would stun German tank crews, redefine engagements, and challenge assumptions about armored warfare. The tanks were rolling forward, crews tense, terrain unforgiving, and the first clashes were about to test both machine and soldier. For the men inside the Pershing, every mission carried an acute awareness of their tank's power and their vulnerability. Unlike the more numerous Shermans, Pershing crews were few, highly trained, and operating in small, high-stakes formations. Field reports from the 3rd Armored Division describe a mix of awe and anxiety. The 90mm gun was capable of knocking out any German tank, yet German anti-tank weapons, especially the 75mm or PaK-40 and remaining Tiger IIs, remained a lethal threat. Soldiers recounted moments when rounds slammed into the Pershing's frontal armor, denting the metal, but leaving the crew largely unharmed. The psychological impact was profound. Survival against direct hits forged a hardened confidence in the Eat-Ohr crew, while repeated encounters with German armor tested nerves and decision-making under fire. These men became living instruments of fear on the battlefield, and their presence alone could shift the morale of both allies and enemies. German crews, in contrast, were experiencing the opposite effect. Encounters with Pershings elicited reports of disbelief and fear. Captured diaries from Panther crews describe scenarios where multiple hits failed to disable an American tank, forcing retreats and abandoning positions. The human dimension of warfare, panic, hesitation, and psychological shock, played a critical role in shaping the outcome of armored skirmishes. German soldiers knew their tanks were powerful, but facing a Pershing changed the mental calculus of combat. Even experienced crews hesitated, re-evaluated tactics, and sometimes chose survival over engagement. Tactically, the Pershing allowed American forces to confront German heavy armor head-on rather than relying solely on flanking maneuvers or artillery support. Its combination of speed, armor, and firepower enabled flexible deployment in both offensive thrusts and defensive operations. During the push into the Rhineland, American units leveraged the Pershing to spearhead assaults on fortified positions, often coordinating with infantry and artillery to suppress enemy anti-tank weapons. Combat reports indicate that even in urban and forested environments, where visibility and maneuverability were restricted, the Pershing's ability to survive hits and return accurate fire allowed small units to engage numerically superior German forces. German tactics had to adapt quickly. The Pershing's long-range firepower meant that ambushes, once reliable against Shermans, became far less effective. Crews had to consider new angles of attack, coordinate with artillery, and often rely on defensive positioning to offset the Pershing's technological advantage. This tactical imbalance added to the sense of uncertainty and urgency among German units. The technological leap represented by the Pershing was stark. Its 90mm M3 gun could penetrate Panther frontal armor at distances exceeding 1,000 meters, a range at which German tanks often struggled to respond effectively. Armor plating, angled and reinforced, allowed Pershings to survive hits from 75mm and even some 88mm rounds. The tank's drivetrain and suspension, while heavier than the Sherman, were robust enough to support the additional armor without sacrificing maneuverability significantly. Reports from battlefield engineers highlight how the Pershing's design allowed it to maintain operational capability even after sustaining multiple hits, a crucial factor in late war engagements where replacements were limited and recovery crews were scarce. This technological edge was compounded by battlefield coordination. Radios, trained loaders, and gunners ensured that each Pershing could operate efficiently within combined arms formations. In contrast, German crews, often undertrained and facing dwindling resources, could not always exploit their tanks' theoretical advantages, leaving them vulnerable to these technologically superior opponents. The Pershing was more than a tank. It was a symbol of shifting power, changing tactics, and human endurance under fire. Each engagement tested the men inside and outside the armor, forcing both sides to confront the brutal reality of late-war armored combat. Commanders on both sides quickly recognized the implications of the Pershing. American officers saw it not merely as a weapon, but as a force multiplier. Leaders like General Rose and Colonel Daniel T. Fitzpatrick integrated Pershings into combined arms doctrine, using them to punch through fortified lines, support infantry assaults, and counter German armored counterattacks. Orders emphasized careful positioning, overlapping fields of fire, and prioritizing targets to maximize the psychological and tactical effect. Leaders also had to instill confidence in crews who were aware of their small numbers and the high stakes of each engagement. Their success hinged on clear communication, discipline, and understanding the unique capabilities of their tanks. German leadership faced a crisis of adjustment. Experienced commanders, accustomed to the relative fragility of American Shermans, suddenly confronted an armored vehicle that could survive their best hits while delivering lethal firepower in return. Reports from panzer divisions reveal that officers were forced to reconsider conventional deployment patterns, often ordering retreats or conservative engagements when facing unknown numbers of Pershings. The appearance of these tanks eroded initiative at the tactical level, slowing advances and forcing improvisation in defensive operations. Command decisions increasingly relied on reconnaissance, artillery preparation, and ambushes, an acknowledgement that traditional tactics could no longer guarantee success. For German soldiers, the Pershing was terrifying and disorienting. Multiple accounts from the Ardennes to the Ruhr describe situations where Panther and Tiger crews fired repeatedly at a Pershing, only to see it continue moving, firing back, and supporting infantry. The psychological effect was as significant as the physical threat. Morale, already strained by resource shortages, exhaustion, and sustained Allied pressure, suffered further. Fear of these tanks caused hesitation, abandonment of positions, and, in some cases, complete withdrawal. Allied intelligence reports noted that German units often exaggerated the presence of Pershings, attributing broader battlefield losses to a few of these tanks. This indicates not only the operational effectiveness of the Pershing, but also its role as a tool of psychological warfare. The knowledge that a single tank could dominate engagements reshaped the German perception of the battlefield and heightened the fear factor in both officers and enlisted men. The Pershing's introduction also raises questions about the moral calculus of armored warfare. Crews were aware that their tank could withstand hits that would destroy other vehicles, effectively giving them a relative invincibility in combat. This survivability created an ethical tension. Soldiers had the power to inflict devastating damage while often facing minimal personal risk. Reports from surviving German POWs describe the terror and desperation of encountering Pershings, highlighting the uneven lethality between forces. Yet, for American crews, the responsibility was immediate and tangible. Each shot fired could mean life or death for enemy soldiers, emphasizing the human cost behind technological superiority. The Pershing, in all these dimensions, human, tactical, technological, leadership, enemy perception, and moral responsibility, transformed the dynamics of armored combat. It was not simply a machine, it was a pivot around which the late-war battlefield turned. Each angle reinforced the notion that when technology meets human endurance and leadership, the outcomes can be both predictable and astonishingly chaotic. December 16, 1944. The dense Ardennes forest is silent, save for the faint hiss of frost under boots and the occasional distant rumble of artillery. Snow clings to the trees, masking the churned mud beneath. It is the opening of the Battle of the Bulge, a last-ditch German offensive aimed at splitting the Allied front. American forces, stretched thin and caught off guard, scrambled to hold key crossroads and supply points. Among them, a handful of newly deployed M26 Pershings arrive, their olive-drab hulls stark against the snow. Crews, cold and tense, know they are entering a fight that will test every aspect of their training. The Pershing's 90mm gun, its armor, and its diesel engine are still unproven in large-scale combat. Yet they represent the Allies' most potent counter to German Panther and Tiger tanks. By mid-morning, reports stream in from the front. A single Pershing, under the command of Lieutenant Charles Chuck Bailey, is positioned on a ridge overlooking a narrow valley. German Panzerwehrfours and Panthers push forward, confident in their numerical superiority. The Pershing fires its first rounds, each shell a pinpoint strike against engine blocks and turrets. German tank crews recoil as their shells either glance harmlessly off the thick frontal armor or fail to disable the vehicle entirely. One Panther hit 3 times in succession continues to move, its gun tracking targets with deadly accuracy. The initial clash is brief but decisive. German crews falter. Infantry soldiers, exposed and advancing behind armored vehicles, scatter at the sight of the Pershing's muzzle flashes and the deep craters it leaves. The psychological shock of a tank that refuses to die spreads quickly along the German line. Commanders attempt to reorganize their assault, but the terrain, winter weather, and sudden firepower make coordination impossible. Meanwhile, American tankers are calculating every shot. They conserve ammunition, aim for weak spots, and coordinate with infantry to maximize the Pershing's impact. The tactical advantage of the Pershing, combined with disciplined leadership, begins to turn what seemed a desperate defensive stand into an organized counteraction. By dusk, the Pershings have halted multiple German spearheads. Units that had been advancing with confidence are now withdrawing, regrouping, and reassessing. Field reports later describe the awe-inspiring effect. A few tanks, properly deployed, had neutralized superior numbers and inflicted both physical and psychological damage that resonates across the front. The battle's turning point is not a single explosion, but a sequence of precise, controlled engagements. The Pershings, with their combination of armor, firepower, and crew discipline, demonstrate that late-war German armor, formidable as it was, is no longer invincible. This engagement sets the stage for the broader collapse of the German offensive in the Ardennes, but the story of the Pershing's dominance is far from complete. December the 17th to 20, 1944, the Ardennes is now a frozen battlefield. Snow covers the remnants of shattered vehicles, and the air smells of smoke, diesel, and scorched earth. The Germans, initially confident, push forward in waves. But each attack is met with a disciplined barrage of 90mm shells from the Pershings. Lieutenant Bailey's unit, now joined by 2 more Pershings, positions along a ridge near Stoumont. Visibility is low. Fog and smoke blur the line between friend and foe. German tank commanders, trained to respect their own Tigers and Panthers, are unnerved. The Pershing's thick frontal armor deflects multiple hits from Panther 75mm and even Tiger 88mm guns. One report notes a Panther struck 3 times in the turret. Its gun jammed, yet the Pershing remained fully operational, allowing its crew to deliver lethal counterfire. The Americans adapt quickly. Infantry teams deploy anti-tank grenades and mines to channel German armor into kill zones. The Pershings, firing in controlled bursts, target tracks, engines, and vulnerable side armor. Each shot is precise. The Germans are unprepared for a tank that combines mobility, protection, and firepower in this new configuration. Psychological impact spreads rapidly. German tank crews, accustomed to striking fear into opponents, now hesitate. The sight of a Pershing shrugging off multiple direct hits is disorienting. Veterans describe a creeping disbelief. Machines they considered unstoppable are being systematically destroyed or repelled. Commanders struggle to maintain momentum. Orders are miscommunicated, and units fragment under the stress of the relentless American counterattacks. By December 20th, the German offensive has lost its initial momentum. Pershings, though few in number, are instrumental. They dominate the battlefield not merely through brute force, but by enabling combined arms coordination. Infantry holds key crossroads. Artillery covers open approaches. Tanks strike decisively at enemy armor. The Germans are forced into defensive postures they had not anticipated, losing both initiative and morale. Field dispatches later capture the astonishment. These tanks, they take 3 hits and keep going. Every crew we sent against them falters. Morale is broken before we even engage fully. The Pershings, arriving at the right moment with superior design and disciplined crews, shift the balance in a desperate sector of the front. The Ardennes, once a theater of potential German resurgence, now becomes a proving ground for the Pershing's strategic and psychological impact. The battlefield clarity gained here will echo through the remaining months of the European campaign. With the Germans forced to retreat, the aftermath of the Pershing's first combat deployment begins to reveal itself, not only in numbers of destroyed tanks, but in a profound shift in armored warfare doctrine. January 1945. The Ardennes forest lies in silence, broken only by the distant rumble of retreating German columns and the occasional crackle of artillery still settling into winter positions. Snow drifts across abandoned vehicles, their metal carcasses scarred by 75 mm 80 TITM, and now the terrifying new 90 mm rounds. The battlefield is littered with Tigers, Panthers, and Panzer IVs, many knocked out by the Pershing's firepower. The introduction of the M26 Pershing had been limited but decisive. Only a handful of units were present during the Battle of the Bulge, yet their impact was disproportionate. U.S. Army. After-action reports note that Pershings altered German tactical decisions and provided infantry and armor with a confidence previously unattainable against heavy enemy tanks. In sectors where Pershings were deployed, German armored advances stalled or faltered entirely, creating pockets where Allied forces could regroup and counterattack. Casualty reports paint a stark picture. German armored divisions suffered losses exceeding 20% in some spearhead units during encounters with Pershing-supported positions. Tiger and Panther crews, once confident in their superior tanks, were forced into defensive maneuvers against machines they could not reliably destroy. For American forces, losses were comparatively lower. The Pershing's armor and firepower allowed crews to engage at standoff distances, neutralizing the psychological advantage long held by German heavy armor. The human dimension is equally revealing. Soldiers on both sides recounted the effect of these new tanks on morale. German tankers described a creeping dread when encountering Pershings. "We fired our main guns 3 times. Nothing stopped it. It moved. It shot back." Fear settled in. On the American side, infantry and tank crews reported renewed confidence, often following Pershing breakthroughs into previously contested towns or crossroads. Letters and diaries mention the almost surreal experience of seeing enemy heavy tanks destroyed with comparative ease. A reversal of the fear that had dominated engagements in 1944, logistics and strategy also shifted. The Allies recognized the need to integrate the Pershing more broadly into armored units. Its ability to survive multiple direct hits meant that combined arms tactics could be executed with greater aggression. Infantry could advance behind these tanks. Artillery could be repositioned without fear of losing armored cover. Air support could coordinate more safely with ground advances. Even the German command took note, adjusting tactics and dispersing armor to reduce exposure. A tacit acknowledgement of the Pershing's battlefield influence. The initial deployment had proved that quality could outweigh quantity. While only a fraction of the armored divisions fielded Pershings, their presence disrupted German calculations, delayed offensives, and set conditions for a more rapid Allied advance in early 1945. The stage was now set to examine the second wave of consequences, how the Pershing's debut not only influenced immediate battlefield outcomes but reshaped armored warfare doctrine and psychological warfare strategies across the European theater. By February 1945, the Pershing had begun to leave a more permanent mark on the European battlefields. Its presence in U.S. armored units, though still limited in numbers, had forced the German High Command to confront an uncomfortable reality. Their once feared heavy tanks no longer guaranteed battlefield dominance. The psychological impact was pronounced. Frontline reports from German panzer crews describe hesitancy and caution where previously there had been aggressive maneuvers. Even elite units, such as the 503rd Heavy Panzer Battalion, found their strategies increasingly reactive, forced to avoid open engagement wherever Pershings were reported. Field reports from U.S. forces corroborate this shift. One after-action summary notes, the M26's ability to withstand multiple hits from enemy 75 mm and 80 mm guns allowed combined arms operations to proceed with fewer casualties. Infantry movements were more confident, and our armor units reported unprecedented survivability in close-quarters engagements. This assessment highlighted not just the technical superiority of the tank, but its effect on operational tempo. Units equipped with Pershings could hold ground that previously would have required reinforcement or artillery support, creating a domino effect in planning and execution. Numbers illustrate the tangible impact. During the closing weeks of the war, U.S. armored divisions using Pershings engaged in several direct confrontations with German heavy armor, with kill ratios favoring the Americans at rates previously unseen in European engagements. Historians estimate that in skirmishes where Pershings were present, German armored losses increased by 25–30% relative to sectors without them. Even the Allies' overall casualty rates dropped, as the Pershing's durability reduced the need for repeated assaults on fortified positions. The technical superiority of the Pershing also accelerated changes in German armored tactics. Doctrine began to emphasize dispersion and concealment, avoiding massed armor formations that could be decisively engaged by a few Pershings. German tank commanders experimented with ambushes and combined fire from infantry and artillery. But the psychological weight of facing a vehicle that could absorb multiple hits had already altered battlefield decision-making. Fear and uncertainty became silent weapons of the M26, shaping engagements before any shots were fired. Beyond immediate tactical outcomes, the Pershing's deployment had broader implications for post-war armored warfare doctrine. U.S. planners began to recognize the value of heavy, well-armored main battle tanks capable of delivering sustained fire against both enemy vehicles and fortified positions. The lessons learned from these early engagements informed the design of the M26 Patton and subsequent generations of American armor, emphasizing firepower, armor, and crew survivability as central tenets of tank development. By April 1945, as German resistance crumbled in the Ruhr and along the Rhine, the Pershing had cemented its reputation. Survivors' accounts, wartime reports, and photographic evidence all underscore its effectiveness, both as a weapon and as a psychological instrument of war. German soldiers recalled it with respect and trepidation, while American crews credited it with saving lives and shortening engagements. The battlefield impact was measurable, immediate, and enduring. With the war nearing its conclusion in Europe, the focus now turns to the final reflection, what the Pershing represented not only in 1945, but in the evolution of armored warfare, human courage, and the enduring interplay between technology and combat psychology. The M26 Pershing was more than steel and gunpowder. It was a symbol of adaptation, a tangible answer to the evolving threats of armored warfare. For German tank crews who had once dominated European battlefields, facing a Pershing was a confrontation with an unfamiliar reality. A machine that could endure, strike back, and change the rules of engagement in an instant. The psychological weight it carried rivaled its physical firepower. Soldiers, both enemy and ally, recognized that the battlefield was no longer just a contest of numbers or courage. It had become a contest of innovation. In the broader sweep of history, the Pershing signaled a shift in armored doctrine. It represented a bridge between the medium tanks of early World War II and the heavy, well-protected main battle tanks of the Cold War. Lessons learned in its deployment, emphasizing crew survivability. Balanced firepower and operational flexibility reshaped U.S. armored forces for decades. Each engagement left a mark not only on maps, but on the collective memory of soldiers, influencing strategy, engineering, and military psychology alike. Yet beyond tactics and statistics, the Pershing reminds us of a more human story. Its armored hull sheltered lives, its gun delivered decisive strikes, and its presence instilled both awe and fear. It became a silent witness to the chaos, courage, and desperation of soldiers caught in a war that demanded constant adaptation. For historians, it stands as a lesson in the interplay between technology and human experience. How machines shape conflict, how conflict shapes men, and how innovation can tilt the balance in ways both immediate and enduring. The story of the Pershing is thus not just a tale of steel versus steel, but of resilience, adaptation, and the quiet, unyielding power of human ingenuity in the theater of war. Its legacy endures, not merely in museums or textbooks, but in the understanding that in war, survival often begins with innovation. This closes the cinematic journey of the M26 Pershing's emergence in World War II, leaving behind the echo of engines, the flash of gunfire, and the indelible mark it left on history.